The heat rose from the asphalt in shimmering waves, distorting the afternoon light until the streets of Atlanta looked like a fever dream. Sarah Collins wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stepped out of her unmarked vehicle, the air conditioning's ghost already fading from her skin. Beside her, Max jumped down from the back seat, his tongue lolling out. Ears perked, despite the oppressive temperature that had pushed past 95 degrees for the 6th consecutive day. Her shift had ended 40 minutes ago, but the paperwork from the morning's warehouse raid had kept her at the precinct longer than expected. 3 suspects in custody, 14 kilos of contraband seized, and enough documentation to keep the district attorney's office busy for months. A good day by any measure, though her body disagreed. Every muscle ached with the particular exhaustion that came from 12 hours of high-alert operations, followed by administrative tedium. Max pressed his nose against her palm as they walked toward the entrance of her apartment building. A 4-story brick structure in a quiet neighborhood that had somehow resisted gentrification. The building superintendent had fixed the front door lock 3 weeks ago, but Sarah still checked it out of habit. The heavy glass door swung open smoothly, and the lobby's relative coolness washed over them both. The elevator was out of service again. A handwritten sign taped to the metal doors promised repairs by Friday, the same promise that had been made for the past 2 Fridays. Sarah sighed and headed for the stairs, Max padding silently beside her. 3 flights up, turn left, apartment 3C at the end of the hallway. She noticed it before she reached the door, a thin line of light beneath the frame. Visible even in the hallway's fluorescent glare, Sarah always turned off every light before leaving. Always. It was a habit born from years of training, a small discipline that had saved her life more than once. Someone had been inside her apartment. Someone might still be there. Her hand moved to her service weapon, fingers wrapping around the grip with practiced ease. Max's demeanor shifted instantly, his body lowering, muscles coiling, eyes fixed on the door ahead. He had sensed her tension before she even touched the gun, reading her body language with the precision that made him one of the department's most decorated K-9 officers. Sarah approached the door at an angle, keeping her back to the wall. The lock showed no signs of forced entry. Either someone had a key or they possessed skills that elevated this situation from break-in to something far more concerning. She pressed her ear to the wood and heard voices. Multiple people, speaking in hushed tones that carried the unmistakable cadence of argument. She could call for backup. Protocol demanded it, but something in those voices triggered a memory, a recognition that bypassed her tactical training and struck somewhere deeper. She knew that voice. She had grown up hearing that voice, had spent 18 years of her life under the same roof as that voice before she left for the academy and never looked back. Sarah holstered her weapon and opened the door. 3 figures turned toward her from the living room. Derek stood nearest the window, his frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. Broader than she remembered, but carrying the same posture of barely contained aggression that had defined him since childhood. Vanessa sat on the couch, her designer handbag clutched in her lap like a shield, makeup immaculate despite the heat, eyes darting between Sarah and her husband with the nervous energy of a trapped animal. And in the corner, pressed against the bookshelf as if trying to disappear into the wall, stood a teenage boy with Derek's jawline and Vanessa's anxious eyes. Max growled, low and sustained, positioning himself between Sarah and the intruders. He did not recognize these people as family. He recognized only the threat they represented, the violation of his handler's territory, the tension that crackled through the room like static electricity before a storm. Derek stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture meant to be calming, but executed with the impatience of someone unaccustomed to asking for anything. His polo shirt was wrinkled, sweat stains visible beneath the arms, and his usually immaculate hair had been raked through by anxious fingers until it stood in uneven tufts. Sarah. Finally. We've been waiting for 3 hours. She did not move from the doorway. You broke into my apartment. I didn't break in. I got the super to let us in, told him we were family, that you were expecting us, that it was an emergency. Derek's voice carried the same dismissive tone he had used throughout their childhood, the voice of an older brother who had never respected boundaries because he had never faced consequences for crossing them. We need to talk. You could have called. Would you have answered? Sarah said nothing. They both knew the answer. She had not spoken to Derek in 11 years, had not responded to his occasional messages that always seemed to arrive when he needed something. Their parents' funeral had been the last time they occupied the same space, a rain-soaked afternoon in a cemetery outside Savannah, where they had stood on opposite sides of the grave and exchanged exactly 14 words. Vanessa rose from the couch, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor that Sarah had refinished herself 2 summers ago. Sarah, please. We wouldn't have come if it wasn't important. You know that. After everything, you know we wouldn't just show up unless we had no other choice. Max's growl intensified. Sarah placed a hand on his head, feeling the vibration of his warning rumble through her fingertips. He was reading Vanessa with the same intensity he brought to suspects in the field, cataloguing her micro-expressions, her body language, the chemical signatures of fear and desperation that no amount of perfume could mask. You have 5 minutes, Sarah said. Then you leave, and you don't come back. Derek's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He crossed to the dining table that Sarah used as a desk, pulling a manila folder from the messenger bag she had not noticed hanging from his shoulder. Documents spilled across the surface, legal papers covered in dense text, signatures, official stamps. The house in Savannah, Mom and Dad's house. You inherited it outright when they died. The whole thing, property and contents, worth approximately $150,000. Derek's finger stabbed at the documents as he spoke, punctuating each claim with aggressive precision. That wasn't supposed to happen. The will was supposed to split everything equally. You got the house, I got nothing, and now I need what's mine. Sarah remained by the door, her expression unchanged. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb with me. I have the probate records right here. Everything went to you. The house, the accounts, all of it. I was cut out completely. Derek's voice rose, his face reddening beneath its summer tan. I don't know what you said to them before they died, what lies you told, but you manipulated them into changing the will, and now you owe me $150,000. The silence that followed was broken only by Max's continued growling and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Sarah studied her brother's face, searching for some trace of the boy she had known, the older brother who had taught her to ride a bike and defended her from bullies before he became one himself. She found nothing but desperation and the particular righteousness of someone who had convinced himself of his own victimhood. I never received any inheritance, Sarah said quietly. Mom and Dad didn't have a house in Savannah when they died. They lost it 5 years before the accident during the foreclosure crisis. They were renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur. The estate barely covered the funeral costs. Derek's expression flickered, something passing behind his eyes too quickly to identify. He recovered with a shake of his head, shuffling through the documents with increasing agitation. That's not what these papers say. I had a lawyer look into it. He found records, property transfers, everything. You inherited the house and sold it without telling me, kept all the money for yourself. Your lawyer is wrong, or lying to you. There was no house. Then explain these documents, explain the probate filing, explain why your name is on every single page. Derek thrust a paper toward her, his hand trembling with anger or something else. $150,000, Sarah. That's what you owe me. That's what you stole from my family. Sarah took the document, her training automatically cataloguing details, even as her mind processed the absurdity of the accusation. The paper looked official enough, bearing seals and signatures and case numbers. But something was wrong. The font was slightly off, the margins inconsistent, the watermark visible at an angle that suggested scanning and reprinting rather than original filing. She had seen enough forged documents in her career to recognize the signs. "Where did you get these?" "I told you. A lawyer. He specializes in estate recovery, helping people who've been cheated out of their inheritance." Derek's voice carried a note of triumph, as if he had caught her in an admission. "He found everything, traced the whole thing. You can't deny it anymore." Vanessa approached the table, her hand finding Derek's arm in a gesture that might have been supportive or restraining. "Sarah, please. We're not trying to fight. We just need the money. Derek's business. Things have been difficult. We have bills, obligations. Tyler needs to start college next year." She gestured toward the teenager in the corner, who flinched at the mention of his name. "We're family. Whatever happened in the past, we're still family. Can't we work something out?" Max had stopped growling, but his attention remained fixed on Vanessa with an intensity that made Sarah uncomfortable. Dogs could not lie, and they could not be fooled by lies. Whatever Vanessa was projecting, whatever carefully constructed facade of reasonableness she had built, Max was seeing through it to something beneath. Sarah set the document on the table and turned to study her nephew for the first time. Tyler was 16 or 17, she guessed, tall and thin, with the gangly proportions of adolescence. He had not spoken since her arrival, had not moved from his position against the bookshelf. His eyes met hers briefly before sliding away, and in that moment of contact, she saw something that did not match the narrative his parents were presenting. Not greed, not entitlement, fear, deep, pervasive, consuming fear. "Tyler," Sarah said, keeping her voice neutral, "how was the drive up from Savannah?" The boy's mouth opened, but Derek answered before he could speak. "Long. Hot. The air conditioning in the car is broken. Look, we didn't come here to chat. We came here to settle this. $150,000, Sarah. You can afford it. I know what lieutenants make, and I know you don't spend money on anything. You've probably got twice that sitting in savings. I'm not giving you money based on forged documents and a fabricated inheritance." Derek's face contorted, the mask of civility slipping to reveal something uglier beneath. "Forged? Are you calling me a liar? I came here in good faith, trying to settle this like adults, and you're accusing me of fraud?" "I'm telling you facts. Mom and Dad lost their house in 2009. They had no assets when they died. The probate court records from Fulton County will confirm this. Whatever your lawyer told you, whatever these papers claim, they're wrong." Sarah paused, watching the reactions of all three visitors. Derek's anger, Vanessa's nervous energy, Tyler's fear. "Unless you knew that already." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Derek's face went through a rapid series of expressions before settling on outraged innocence, but the delay was telling. Vanessa's grip on her handbag tightened until her knuckles went white, and Tyler, in his corner, seemed to shrink even further into himself. "I think you should leave," Sarah said. "Now. We're not going anywhere until this is settled." Derek stepped closer, his larger frame meant to intimidate, to remind her of the size difference that had mattered when they were children. "I'm not leaving Atlanta without what's owed to me." Max surged forward, placing himself directly between Sarah and her brother, his bark sharp and commanding in the confined space. Derek stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table, his face pale beneath its flush of anger. For a moment, the room balanced on a knife's edge, the potential for violence thrumming through every particle of air. "Max, down!" Sarah's command was quiet, but firm. The dog obeyed immediately, settling onto his haunches, but maintaining his position between her and the intruders. Derek, I'm going to say this once. You entered my home without permission. You're making accusations based on fraudulent documents, and now you're threatening me in my own living room. I'm giving you the opportunity to walk out that door right now. If you don't take it, I will arrest you for breaking and entering, attempted extortion, and whatever else I can make stick. Your choice. The standoff lasted nearly 30 seconds. Finally, Derek snatched the documents from the table, stuffing them back into his messenger bag with jerky, angry movements. This isn't over. I have a lawyer. I have proof. You can hide behind your badge all you want, but I'm not going away. He stormed toward the door, shouldering past Sarah with deliberate aggression. Vanessa followed, pausing at the threshold to look back with an expression that might have been apologetic or might have been calculating. Tyler was last, moving with the reluctance of someone being led to execution, and as he passed Sarah, he pressed something into her hand. A piece of paper folded small, transferred so quickly that neither of his parents noticed. Then they were gone, footsteps echoing down the hallway toward the stairs, voices resuming their argument before they had even reached the second floor. Sarah stood in her doorway, listening until the sounds faded, then closed and locked the door with hands that were not quite steady. Max whined, pressing his body against her legs, seeking reassurance that the threat had passed. She knelt beside him, running her fingers through his fur, feeling his heartbeat gradually slow from its elevated state. Whatever had just happened, whatever game Derek was playing, Max had seen through it from the first moment. His instincts had been screaming danger, while her own had been clouded by memory and blood. She unfolded the paper Tyler had given her. A phone number, scrawled in pencil, and 3 words beneath it, "Please help us." Sarah stared at the message for a long time, her mind racing through possibilities. Then she pulled out her phone and began to make calls. Max watched her with quiet attention, his head tilted slightly, as if he could understand the weight of what was happening. In many ways, he could. 7 years of partnership had taught him to read her moods, to sense the subtle shifts in her body language that signaled distress or determination or the particular focus that preceded action. Right now, he was reading all 3. She called her contact at the county clerk's office first, requesting copies of any probate records from her parents' estate. The woman on the other end promised to have them digitized and emailed within the hour. No questions asked about why a police lieutenant needed decade-old inheritance documents on short notice. Sarah appreciated the professional courtesy, the network of favors and relationships she had built over years of doing things the right way. While waiting, she made a second call to an old friend from the academy who now worked cybercrime. She asked about document forgery, specifically the kind that would produce official-looking probate papers, complete with seals and signatures. The answer confirmed her suspicions. Good forgeries required access to either the original documents or high-quality scans, specialized printing equipment, and knowledge of legal formatting that was surprisingly easy to find online. Bad forgeries, the kind that fell apart under scrutiny, could be produced by almost anyone with a decent printer and minimal effort. Derek's documents had been bad forgeries, which meant either he had made them himself, unlikely given his general lack of technical sophistication, or someone had provided them to him. Someone who did not care whether the forgeries held up because their purpose was pressure, not proof. The third call went to a reporter she trusted at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a woman named Rachel Torres, who specialized in investigative pieces about organized crime. Sarah asked about Meridian Capital Partners without explaining why, and Torres's sharp intake of breath told her everything she needed to know before the words came. Sarah used the word carefully. The legal kind, technically, but they're connected to some very bad people. Very bad. I've been trying to build a case against them for 2 years, but they're slippery. Every time we get close, witnesses disappear or recant. Evidence goes missing. They've got connections somewhere, either in law enforcement or the courts. Torres paused. Why are you asking, Lieutenant? Are they involved in something active? I don't know yet, but if they are, I'll let you know, off the record. I appreciate that, and Sarah, be careful. These aren't the kind of people who follow rules. The warning echoed in Sarah's mind as she ended the call. Max pressed closer to her legs, sensing her tension, offering the silent support that had seen her through countless difficult moments. She reached down to stroke his head, drawing comfort from the simple contact. The email from the county clerk arrived 20 minutes later, containing scanned copies of every document related to her parents' estate. Sarah reviewed them carefully, comparing the formatting and language to the pages Derek had shown her. The differences were glaring once you knew what to look for: different fonts, wrong case number sequences, signatures that were clearly copied rather than original. Derek's documents were not just wrong, they were obvious fakes to anyone with the training to recognize them. But Derek did not have that training, and neither did whoever had given him the documents, or they had simply not cared about quality. The forgeries were meant to be convincing enough to pressure a civilian into paying without question, not to withstand legal scrutiny. Which raised another question. Why Sarah? If Meridian Capital was behind this, they must have known she was a police officer. Targeting law enforcement for extortion was exponentially more dangerous than going after regular citizens. Either they were desperate, or they were testing something, or there was information she was missing. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she did not recognize. 4 words that made her blood run cold. Time is running out. Sarah saved the message and added the number to her call log for later analysis. Whoever was behind this, they were watching. They knew she was investigating, and they wanted her to know that they knew. Max growled softly, responding to the spike of adrenaline he could sense through their bond. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly, to think clearly, to approach this the way she would any other case. Fear was useful only if it sharpened focus. Panic was the enemy. She had one advantage that whoever was threatening her did not know about. She was not alone. She had colleagues, resources, the entire weight of the Atlanta Police Department behind her if she chose to invoke it. And she had Max, whose instincts had never failed her, whose courage had never wavered. They would figure this out. Together, the same way they figured out everything. The Atlanta Police Department's Records Division occupied a basement office in the main precinct building, a windowless space filled with filing cabinets and computer terminals manned by civilian employees who had seen every kind of request. Sarah arrived shortly after 6 in the evening, Max padding beside her on his leash, both of them drawing looks from officers who knew the K-9 unit's reputation. Detective Margaret Chen looked up from her terminal as Sarah approached, her reading glasses perched on her nose, grey hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. They had worked together on several cases over the years, developing the particular rapport that exists between people who respect each other's competence without needing friendship. "Lieutenant Collins, you look like someone who needs information after hours." "I need a favor, Maggie. Off the books." Chen removed her glasses, studying Sarah with the assessing gaze of someone who had spent 30 years reading people. "This about a case. It might be. It's about my brother." Something shifted in Chen's expression, a subtle softening that acknowledged the weight of family complications. She gestured to the chair beside her desk, waiting until Sarah sat before rolling her own chair closer. Max settled at Sarah's feet, his eyes tracking movement throughout the busy basement. "Tell me what you need." Sarah explained the situation in concise terms, omitting nothing but keeping her voice low enough that only Chen could hear. The unexpected visitors, the documents claiming inheritance, Derek's demands for money, and Tyler's secret plea for help. Chen listened without interrupting, her fingers occasionally tapping against her desk in a rhythm that suggested active processing. "These documents you saw," Chen said when Sarah finished. "You're certain they were forgeries?" 90% certain. The watermarks were wrong, the fonts didn't match standard probate filings, and the case numbers don't follow the right format for Fulton County records from that period. Sarah paused. "I could be wrong. That's why I'm here." Chen turned to her terminal, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Fulton County probate, you said? Let me pull up the actual records from your parents' estate." The search took several minutes, the database cycling through years of archived records. Sarah waited in silence, watching the screen over Chen's shoulder, Max's warm presence against her ankles, a grounding force. Finally, a series of documents appeared, official filings bearing the authenticated stamps of the county clerk's office. "Here we go. Estate of Robert and Margaret Collins, deceased 2013, probate case number 2013 PR 4471. Chen scrolled through the records, her eyebrows rising. "No real property listed, total estate value of $8,400, disbursed entirely to cover funeral expenses and outstanding medical bills. No inheritance distributed to any beneficiaries." She looked at Sarah. "Your brother's documents are definitely fake." "I knew they were. I needed confirmation. The question is why? What's your brother really after?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question since the encounter. $150,000 was a significant sum, but it was also a suspiciously specific number, too precise for a fabricated inheritance claim. If Derek wanted to extort money from her, he could have chosen any amount. The specificity suggested something else. A real debt, a real obligation that he needed to satisfy with exactly that sum. "Can you run him for me?" "Derek Collins should have a Georgia driver's license. Last known address in Savannah." Chen typed the query, and new information populated the screen. Derek's DMV photo appeared first, showing a man who looked older than his 41 years, worry lines etched deep around his eyes. His address was listed in Savannah, a suburban development that Sarah vaguely recognized as one of the planned communities that had sprung up during the housing boom. No criminal record, but there were flags in the system, notations that made Chen lean closer to the screen. Multiple civil judgments against him in the past 18 months. Credit card debt mostly, but there's also a lawsuit from something called Meridian Capital Partners. Judgment entered for. Chen whistled softly. $147,000, plus interest and fees. Sarah felt the pieces beginning to connect. "What's Meridian Capital Partners? Let me check." More typing, more searching, this time through business registrations and corporate databases. "It's a private lending company based out of Florida. No physical address listed, just a registered agent. They specialize in what they call alternative financing solutions for small business owners. Loan sharks, the legal kind, technically. But yeah, they operate in the gray area between legitimate lending and predatory practices. High interest rates, aggressive collection tactics, lots of lawsuits against borrowers who default." Chen turned from the screen, her expression grave. "Your brother owes these people a lot of money, and based on the judgment date, he's been in default for almost a year." The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than Sarah had anticipated. Derek had gotten himself into debt with predatory lenders, probably to prop up a failing business or maintain a lifestyle he could not afford. When the debt came due and he could not pay, he had concocted a scheme to extract money from the only family member who might still feel obligated to help him. The forged documents, the manufactured outrage, the accusations of theft, all of it was theater designed to pressure her into paying off his debts. But Tyler's note suggested something more. "Please help us." Not "please help him" or "please help me." Us. plural. Whatever trouble Derek was in, it had expanded to include his entire family, and the fear Sarah had seen in the boy's eyes was the fear of someone who knew that danger was real and imminent. Can you get me more on Meridian Capital? Who owns it? Who runs it? Any connections to organized activity? Chen hesitated. That would take time and probably require going through official channels. We're already pretty far outside normal procedure here. I know, but my nephew is scared, Maggie. Really scared. And whatever my brother has gotten himself into, that kid doesn't deserve to suffer for it. The older woman studied Sarah for a long moment, then nodded. I'll see what I can find. Give me until tomorrow afternoon, and Sarah, be careful. If Meridian is what I think it is, you're not dealing with garden variety debt collectors. Sarah thanked her and left, Max trotting beside her through the parking garage to her vehicle. The evening air was still warm, the sun casting long shadows across the concrete. But the oppressive heat of the afternoon had begun to break. She loaded Max into the back seat and sat behind the wheel, not starting the engine, just thinking. Tyler's phone number burned in her pocket. She should call, should try to get more information about the situation. But if Derek and Vanessa were monitoring his communications, any contact from her could make things worse. She needed more information before she made a move. Her phone buzzed with a text from Captain Rodriguez, a reminder about tomorrow's briefing on the warehouse raid follow-up. Normal work, normal responsibilities, the comfortable routine of a job she understood. The family crisis waiting in the margins seemed almost surreal by comparison. A problem from another life, intruding on the carefully constructed existence she had built. Max whined from the back seat, and Sarah looked up to find him watching her in the rear-view mirror. His expression, if dogs could have expressions, seemed to be one of concern. She reached back to scratch behind his ears, drawing comfort from the simple contact. I know, buddy. I know. We'll figure it out. She started the engine and drove home, her mind already working through possibilities and contingencies. Sleep would be difficult tonight, but she had functioned on less rest before. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another. The briefing the next morning ran long, as briefings always did when multiple agencies were involved. The warehouse raid had attracted federal attention, and representatives from the DEA wanted to discuss potential connections to a larger network they were investigating. Sarah sat through 3 hours of presentations and jurisdictional negotiations, her attention split between the proceedings and the family problem that gnawed at the edges of her concentration. Max waited in the K-9 unit's climate-controlled kennel facility, probably sleeping in the comfortable run that was reserved for him between operations. He had earned the rest after the previous day's raid, though she suspected he would be eager to work again as soon as she collected him. The dog had an inexhaustible drive, a need for purpose that matched her own. After the briefing, she found Detective Chen waiting outside the conference room, a folder tucked under her arm and an expression that suggested the news inside was not good. Can we talk? Somewhere private? They found an empty interview room on the 3rd floor, a space designed for suspect interrogation, but equally useful for conversations that required discretion. Chen placed the folder on the table and opened it to reveal printouts of corporate records, financial documents, and photographs of several men who looked like they had been subjects of surveillance operations. Meridian Capital Partners is a front, Chen said without preamble. On paper, it's a legitimate private lending company registered in Florida. In practice, it's connected to an organized crime network operating out of Jacksonville. They use the lending business to launder money and to trap small business owners in debt arrangements that make traditional loan sharking look gentle. Sarah studied the photographs. Hard faces, expensive suits, the particular confidence of men who operated above the law by buying the people who were supposed to enforce it. How do they operate? They target business owners who can't get traditional financing. Offer them loans with reasonable-sounding terms, then restructure the debt repeatedly, adding fees and penalties until the principal balloons to many times the original amount. When the borrower inevitably defaults, they don't just sue for the money, they take over the business, use it for their own purposes, and discard the original owner when they're no longer useful. What kind of purposes? Chen slid another document across the table. Money laundering, primarily. They've taken over dozens of small businesses across the southeast. Restaurants, car washes, construction companies, anything that handles cash and can be used to clean dirty money. The owners become employees in their own businesses. They're forced to cook the books and maintain the illusion of legitimate operation. Sarah thought about Derek, about his failing business that had led him to seek alternative financing, about the fear in Tyler's eyes. What happens to the owners who can't pay and don't have businesses worth taking over? That's where it gets ugly. Chen's voice was flat, professional, but Sarah could hear the disgust beneath the surface. They find other ways to extract value. Sometimes it's forcing the debtor to commit crimes on their behalf. Sometimes it's going after family members who might have assets. And sometimes people just disappear. The folder contained one more item, a news clipping from a Jacksonville paper dated 6 months earlier. A man named Thomas Harwell had been found dead in his home, ruled a suicide by local police, despite evidence that suggested otherwise. Thomas Harwell had owed Meridian Capital Partners $112,000 at the time of his death. They killed him? Officially, no. Unofficially, everyone who investigated believes they did. A message to other debtors about what happens when you can't pay and you're not useful anymore. Chen closed the folder. Sarah, your brother is in deep trouble, deeper than he probably realizes. These aren't people who negotiate, and they're not people who give up. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and saw a number she did not recognize, a 912 area code that placed it somewhere in Savannah or the surrounding region. She answered, keeping her voice neutral. This is Collins. Aunt Sarah? Tyler's voice was barely above a whisper, cracking with fear. I'm sorry to call. I know you probably don't want to hear from us, but something's happening. Dad got a call this morning, and now he's freaking out, and Mom is crying. And they're talking about driving somewhere tonight, and I'm scared. Tyler, slow down. Where are you right now? I'm at the hotel, the Red Roof Inn on Piedmont. We're in room 214. Dad said we're going to stay here until things get worked out with you, but I don't think that's really why we're here. I think he's hiding from someone. Sarah met Chen's eyes across the table. The detective was already gathering the folder, her expression grim but determined. Tyler, listen to me carefully. I want you to stay in that room. Don't leave. Don't open the door for anyone you don't know. I'm going to come get you, but it might take a little while. Can you do that? I think so. But what about Mom and Dad? I'll help them too, I promise. But right now, I need you to trust me and stay safe. Can you do that? A long pause, filled with the sound of the boy's breathing. Yeah, I can do that. Good. I'll be there as soon as I can. She ended the call and stood, her mind already shifting into operational mode. I need to go. I'm coming with you. Maggie, this is personal. I can't ask you to get involved. Chen shook her head, gathering the folder and her jacket. You didn't ask. And if Meridian Capital is involved, this stopped being personal the moment they crossed into our jurisdiction. Besides, you might need someone who can run official queries without raising flags. She paused at the door. Also, you're going to need backup. Whatever happens next, you shouldn't face it alone. Sarah wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. Chen was right on every count. She nodded, and together they headed for the elevator. The Red Roof Inn on Piedmont was a budget establishment serving travelers who could not afford the gleaming hotels of downtown Atlanta. Sarah parked her unmarked vehicle in the lot and surveyed the layout while Chen checked in with the front desk. flashing her badge with the casual authority of someone who expected cooperation and usually received it. Max sat in the back seat, his attention fixed on the second floor, where room 214 would be located. He had picked up on Sarah's tension immediately, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert as soon as they arrived. Whatever waited inside that room, he would be ready. Jen returned with a room key, obtained without difficulty after explaining that they were checking on the welfare of a minor. Hotel staff rarely argued with that particular justification. They climbed the exterior stairs, Sarah in the lead, her hand resting on her service weapon out of habit rather than expectation of immediate violence. Room 214 was at the end of the corridor, its door closed, the curtains drawn across the window. Sarah knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the afternoon quiet. "Tyler, it's Aunt Sarah. Open the door." Movement inside, shuffling footsteps, then the rattle of a chain being removed. The door opened to reveal Tyler's pale face, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands shaking. Behind him, the room was in disarray, clothes scattered across the beds, suitcases half-packed, evidence of interrupted flight. "They left," Tyler said, his voice hollow. "About an hour ago. Dad got another call, and they just left. Said they had to take care of something, that I should stay here and wait, that they'd be back tonight." Sarah stepped inside, Chen following close behind. The room smelled of fast food and desperation, the particular scent of people who had been running too long and sleeping too little. She guided Tyler to the edge of one of the beds and crouched in front of him, meeting his eyes with the steady calm she used with witnesses and victims in the field. "Tyler, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. What happened to your father? What these people want? Why you're really in Atlanta?" The boy's composure crumbled. Tears spilled down his cheeks as the story poured out of him, a torrent of fear and confusion and helpless anger at adults who had failed to protect him from problems he did not create and could not solve. Derek's construction business had been struggling for years, the victim of changing markets and competition from larger firms. When the bank refused to extend his credit line, he had turned to alternative lenders, finding Meridian Capital through an advertisement that promised quick approval and flexible terms. The initial loan had been manageable, enough to cover payroll and materials for a project that was supposed to turn the company around. But the project fell through. A client defaulted. Subcontractors demanded payment that Derek did not have. He went back to Meridian for more money, and more again, each loan carrying higher interest and worse terms than the last. By the time he realized what was happening, he was in too deep to escape. The debt had mushroomed from the original $50,000 to over $140,000, with new fees added every month. Then the men came, 2 of them visiting the house in Savannah with smiles that did not reach their eyes. They explained the situation in simple terms. Derek owed money he could not pay. His business was worthless to them, too small and too specialized to be useful for their purposes. But they had done their research. They knew about his sister in Atlanta, the police lieutenant with the steady salary and the careful savings. They suggested with polite menace that family should help family in times of trouble. The inheritance story was their idea. They provided the forged documents, coached Derek on what to say, promised that if he could get the money from Sarah, the debt would be cleared and they would go away. If he failed, or if he refused to try, the consequences would be severe. They did not specify what severe meant. They did not need to. "They said they'd hurt us," Tyler whispered. "Not directly, not like a threat you could report to the police, but they made it clear. If Dad doesn't get the money, something bad is going to happen. To him, to Mom, maybe to me." Sarah listened to the entire account, asking clarifying questions when necessary, building a picture of the situation that confirmed her worst fears. Meridian Capital was not going to be satisfied with anything less than full payment, and Derek had nothing to give them. His desperate gambit to extract money from Sarah had always been a long shot, and now that it had failed, the organization would be looking for other ways to resolve the outstanding debt. "Tyler, where did your parents go? Did they say anything about who they were meeting or where?" "Dad mentioned a warehouse, something about a meeting to work out a new arrangement." The boy's face twisted with confusion and fear. "I don't know what that means, but he looked scared when he said it. Really scared." Chen caught Sarah's eye from across the room. They both understood what a meeting at a warehouse likely meant. It was not a negotiation. It was a reckoning. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Captain Rodriguez answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the gruff tone of someone interrupted during a busy day. "Collins, what's wrong?" "Captain, I need to call in some favors, right now, and I need you to trust me that it's justified." She explained the situation in broad terms, leaving out the personal elements while emphasizing the connection to organized crime and the imminent threat to civilians. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, his silence heavy with calculations about jurisdiction, resources, and the political implications of moving against a criminal network that operated across state lines. "You're sure about the Meridian connection?" "Positive. I have documentation from Detective Chen, and I have a witness who can corroborate their involvement." Sarah glanced at Tyler, who was watching her with desperate hope. "Sir, if we don't act now, people are going to get hurt, maybe killed." Another long pause. "What do you need?" "A tactical team, surveillance capability, and authorization to coordinate with the DEA if this turns into a federal matter." Sarah paused. "And I need to be on point. This is personal, Captain, but it's also the right thing to do." Rodriguez exhaled heavily. "Get me an address. I'll have a team ready within the hour. But Collins, if this goes sideways, it's both our careers on the line." "Understood. Thank you, sir." She ended the call and turned to Tyler. "I need you to think carefully. Did your father say anything else about the warehouse? A street name, a neighborhood, anything that might help us find it?" Tyler closed his eyes, concentrating. "He said something about a place near the railroad tracks, old industrial area, and something about meeting behind a hardware store that closed down years ago." It was not much, but it was enough. Sarah knew the area he was describing, a stretch of abandoned warehouses and derelict buildings on the southern edge of the city. A place where legitimate business had long since fled and only shadows remained. She relayed the information to Chen, who immediately began searching for more specific locations on her phone. "I've got 3 possibilities," Chen said after a few minutes, "all within a half-mile radius of each other, all consistent with the description. Then we check all 3. Sarah turned to Tyler one last time. "I'm going to leave Detective Chen's number with you. You're going to stay here in this room, with the door locked. Do not let anyone in except me or Detective Chen. If anyone else comes, if you feel unsafe for any reason, you call that number immediately. Understood?" Tyler nodded, looking younger than his years. "You're going to find them, right? You're going to bring them back?" Sarah wanted to promise that everything would be fine, that she would save his parents and make the bad people go away. But she had learned long ago not to make promises she might not be able to keep. "I'm going to do everything I can," she said instead. "That's all I can promise. But I don't give up, Tyler. Ever." She left him in the room with Chen's card and $100 from her wallet for food and emergencies. Then she collected Max from the vehicle, loaded him into the back of a patrol car that Chen had requisitioned, and headed south toward the rail yards where her brother might already be facing the consequences of his desperate choices. The drive took 23 minutes through traffic that seemed determined to impede her progress at every intersection. Sarah used the time to coordinate with dispatch, requesting patrol units to establish a perimeter around the target zone without approaching the warehouses themselves. The last thing she needed was a marked cruiser spooking whoever was inside before she could assess the situation. Chen rode in the passenger seat, her tablet open to aerial photographs of the area they were approaching. The industrial zone had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades, a victim of changing economics and shifting trade routes that had left it stranded far from anything useful. Now it served as a dumping ground for construction debris, a canvas for graffiti artists, and apparently a meeting place for people who did not want witnesses. "The first warehouse is the largest," Chen said, zooming in on a rectangular structure that dominated the center of the image. "Used to be a textile mill. Second one is smaller, some kind of processing facility. Third is barely standing, looks like it's been partially demolished. Which one would you choose if you were planning a meeting you didn't want interrupted?" Chen considered the question. The textile mill, multiple exits, good sight lines, enough space to maneuver if things go wrong. The others are too confined, too easy to get trapped. Sarah nodded, her instincts reaching the same conclusion. She radioed the information to the patrol units, instructing them to focus on the textile mill while maintaining awareness of the secondary locations. If she was wrong, they would adjust. But she was rarely wrong about things like this. Max paced in the back seat, his energy building as he sensed their destination approaching. He had been through dozens of operations like this, knew the rhythms and rituals that preceded action. The tactical vest he wore was a signal, a transformation from companion to warrior that he embraced with visible eagerness. "Easy, boy," Sarah murmured, catching his eye in the rearview mirror. Almost there. The staging area came into view ahead, unmarked vehicles already clustered behind the crumbling wall that would shield them from observation. This was the moment when everything shifted, when preparation gave way to execution and theory became reality. Sarah felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the heightened awareness that accompanied imminent action. The tactical team assembled at a staging area 2 blocks from the target zone, a vacant lot hidden from view by a crumbling brick wall that had once belonged to a textile factory. Sarah counted 12 officers in addition to herself, all wearing tactical gear, all carrying the focused expressions of professionals preparing for potential violence. Captain Rodriguez had come himself, unusual for an operation of this scale, but understandable given the circumstances. He pulled Sarah aside while the team conducted final equipment checks, his weathered face lined with concern. "The DEA is sending observers. They'll hang back unless things escalate to a federal level, but they want eyes on whatever we find." He studied her carefully. "You sure you want to be on the entry team? Given the personal connection, no one would blame you for coordinating from outside." "My brother is in there, Captain. Maybe about to get hurt or worse. I'm not sitting this out." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Then take point. You know these people, at least the ones you're trying to save. That knowledge might be the difference between this going right and this going very wrong." Max waited beside her, his tactical vest fitted snugly around his muscular frame, his eyes bright with anticipation. He lived for moments like this, the culmination of all his training and instinct, the chance to do what he was born to do. Sarah ran her hand along his back, feeling the coiled energy beneath his fur. "Easy, boy. Not yet." The surveillance team had identified the target warehouse, a corrugated metal structure squatting beside defunct railroad tracks, its loading doors facing a weed-choked parking lot where 3 vehicles sat in the fading light. 2 were black SUVs with tinted windows, the kind favored by people who valued intimidation over subtlety. The third was a dusty minivan with Georgia plates, the same vehicle Derek had driven to her apartment the day before. Thermal imaging showed at least 6 heat signatures inside the warehouse, clustered near the center of the structure. No way to determine who was who without visual confirmation. No way to know if Derek and Vanessa were standing or kneeling, alive or already beyond help. Sarah briefed the team on the entry plan, a standard 3-point breach designed to overwhelm the occupants before they could react. Max would go in first, his speed and aggression providing the crucial seconds of chaos that would allow the human officers to secure the scene. It was a role he had played dozens of times before, always with perfect execution. "On my mark," she said into her radio. "Alpha Team, breach door 1. Bravo Team, breach door 2. Charlie Team, hold the perimeter and watch for runners. K-9 unit enters with Alpha Team." Acknowledgements came back in sequence, each team leader confirming readiness. Sarah took her position at door 1, a rusted metal panel that would yield to the breaching tool with minimal resistance. Max pressed against her leg, trembling with anticipation, his eyes fixed on the barrier between him and his prey. 3, 2, 1. Execute. The breaching tool hit the door with a crash that echoed across the empty lot. Sarah was through in the next instant, Max surging ahead of her, his bark cutting through the darkness like a blade. The warehouse interior was lit by hanging work lights, pools of harsh illumination surrounded by shadows, and in the center of that light stood a tableau that confirmed every fear she had carried since leaving the hotel. Derek and Vanessa knelt on the concrete floor, their hands zip-tied behind their backs, their faces bearing the marks of rough handling. Around them stood 4 men in casual clothes, their postures relaxed but alert, the easy confidence of predators who did not expect to become prey. A 5th man sat in a folding chair, clearly the leader, watching the proceedings with the detached interest of someone observing a business transaction. Max hit the nearest guard before the man could react, 80 pounds of muscle and teeth driving him to the ground. The second guard reached for a weapon and found himself staring down the barrel of Sarah's service pistol, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "Atlanta Police, nobody move." The next 30 seconds were a blur of shouted commands and enforced compliance. The tactical team poured through both entrances, overwhelming the occupants with numbers and training. 3 of the guards chose surrender, dropping to their knees with hands raised. The 4th tried to run and was intercepted by Max, who held him pinned to the floor until officers arrived with handcuffs. The man in the chair remained seated throughout the entire operation, his expression unchanged, watching the collapse of his operation with something that might have been amusement. He raised his hands slowly when Sarah approached, a thin smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Lieutenant Collins, I've heard a lot about you. On your feet. You're under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy to commit whatever else we find when we dig into your organization. You're making a mistake. I have lawyers who eat police departments for breakfast. This little raid of yours will be dismissed before the paperwork is filed." Sarah grabbed his arm and hauled him upright, none too gently. "Maybe, but you're spending tonight in a cell, and that's a start." She handed him off to another officer and turned to find Derek and Vanessa. They had been moved to the side of the warehouse, the zip ties cut from their wrists, their faces displaying a mixture of relief and shame. Derek looked up as Sarah approached, his eyes red, his lips split, his usual arrogance replaced by something smaller and more vulnerable. "Sarah, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Don't." She cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't thank me. Don't explain. Don't make excuses. We'll talk later, when this is processed, when statements are taken. But right now, I need you to understand something." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "You put your son in danger. You put your wife in danger. You came to me with lies and forged documents, trying to manipulate me into paying for your mistakes. Whatever happens next, whatever legal consequences you face for your involvement with these people, You brought it on yourself. I saved your life tonight because you're my brother, but that doesn't mean I forgive you." Derek's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. Vanessa reached for Sarah's hand, her grip weak and trembling. "Tyler, is he... he's safe. At the hotel. I have someone bringing him here." Sarah looked at the woman she had never particularly liked, the sister-in-law who had always seemed more interested in appearances than substance. "He called me, Vanessa. While you were running around trying to find money to pay off criminals, your son had the courage to ask for help. You might want to think about that." She walked away before either of them could respond, rejoining Max, where he sat panting beside the subdued guard. The dog's tongue lolled happily, his tail wagging at her approach, all the aggression of moments before replaced by the simple joy of a job well done. "Good boy," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "Very good boy." The next several hours were consumed by the machinery of law enforcement. Statements were taken, evidence was catalogued. The men from Meridian Capital were processed and transported to holding facilities, their initial arrogance fading as they realized the scope of the charges being assembled against them. The man in the chair, identified as Marcus Webb, demanded his phone call with increasing urgency, clearly expecting that one conversation to make all his problems disappear. It did not work that way. The DEA observers had seen enough to justify federal involvement, and by midnight, Webb and his associates were facing a combined state and federal case that would take years to resolve. The legal machinery had been set in motion, grinding slowly but inexorably towards something resembling justice. Chen found Sarah during a brief lull in the processing, pressing a cup of coffee into her hands with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent many nights in similar circumstances. "You did good work tonight, Lieutenant. Clean entry, no casualties, all suspects in custody. That's about as perfect as these things get." Sarah sipped the coffee, feeling its warmth spread through her exhausted body. "It doesn't feel perfect. It feels messy and complicated, and like there's a long way to go before this is actually over. That's because you're thinking about the people, not just the operation. The human element is always messy." Chen settled into the chair beside her, her own coffee cradled in both hands. "Your brother made bad choices. He put himself and his family in danger. But he's alive tonight because you chose to act despite having every reason to turn your back on him. I'm not sure that makes me noble or just foolish. Probably both. Most worthwhile things are." Chen smiled, the expression softening her usually stern features. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. Family is complicated, but it's also permanent in ways that most relationships aren't. Walking away might have been easier, but it also would have changed you in ways you can't predict." Sarah thought about that, turning the words over in her mind. She had spent so many years maintaining distance from Derek, building walls that kept the pain of their shared history at arm's length. Tonight, she had climbed over those walls, had reached into the mess he had created, and pulled him out despite everything he had done to push her away. She was not sure what that meant for the future, what it would require from her going forward. But Chen was right about one thing. Walking away would have changed her. It would have confirmed something about herself that she was not ready to accept. And that perhaps was reason enough. Sarah finished her own statement shortly after 2 in the morning, her handwriting growing progressively sloppier as exhaustion took its toll. Captain Rodriguez found her in the break room, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "The family is asking for you." She closed her eyes, wanting nothing more than to go home and sleep for a week. But she had made a promise, or something close to it, and she did not break her word. Derek, Vanessa, and Tyler occupied an interview room on the 2nd floor, not as suspects but as witnesses and victims, though the line between categories was blurrier than usual. Tyler sat between his parents, his young face drawn with exhaustion. but some of the fear had left his eyes. When Sarah entered, he looked up with an expression of pure relief. "You did it. You actually did it." She sat across from them, Max settling at her feet with a heavy sigh. "The immediate threat is neutralized. Webb and his people will be in custody for a long time, and their organization is going to be under investigation for months. The debt your father owed is going to be voided as part of the criminal proceedings." She paused, making sure all three of them were listening. "But this isn't over. Not really." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there are going to be questions about your involvement. You worked with these people, even if you did it under duress. The forged documents, the attempt to extract money from me, the lies you told, all of that is going to have to be addressed." Sarah kept her voice steady, factual, refusing to let emotion color the information. "I've spoken to the prosecutors. They're willing to consider your cooperation, but there will be consequences. Community service, at minimum, possibly probation. Your business is gone, obviously." Vanessa made a small sound of distress. Derek just nodded, his shoulders slumped, accepting a verdict he had been expecting since the warehouse. "What about us?" Tyler asked. "What happens now?" Sarah looked at the boy who had shown more courage than either of his parents. He deserved a better answer than she could give. "Now you rebuild. Your parents face whatever accountability is required, and then they start over. It won't be easy. It might take years, but it's possible." She hesitated, then added something she had not planned to say. "If you need help navigating the process, I can point you towards some resources. Legal aid, financial counseling, that kind of thing. I can't make this go away, but I can make it easier to bear." The offer hung in the air, a bridge extended across a decade of silence and resentment. Derek looked at her with something she had never seen in his eyes before. Not entitlement, not anger. Something closer to gratitude, tinged with the painful recognition of his own failings. "Why? After everything, why would you help us?" Sarah considered the question, turning it over in her mind. She thought about the scared boy in the hotel room, the desperate phone call, the note pressed into her hand with 3 words that had changed everything. She thought about family, about blood, about the complicated ties that bound people together, even when those bonds had been stretched to the breaking point. "Because Tyler asked me to," she said finally. "And because turning your back on family is a choice that changes you, no matter how justified it might be. I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine between us, Derek. It's not. But I'm also not going to leave you to drown when I have the ability to help." She stood, signaling that the conversation was ending. "Get some rest. There are hotels nearby that will take you for the night. We'll talk more tomorrow, once everyone has had some sleep." She left them there, making her way through the quiet corridors of the precinct toward the exit. Max padded beside her, his nails clicking on the linoleum, his presence a constant comfort in the strange aftermath of the night's events. The air outside was cool, the heat wave finally broken by a front that had moved through while they were processing the scene. Sarah stopped in the parking lot, tilting her face toward the sky, breathing in the clean air that carried hints of rain yet to come. "What a day, huh, boy?" Max looked up at her, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes reflecting the lights from the building behind them. He did not understand the complexities of human family dynamics, the tangled history of resentment and obligation that had brought them to this point. He understood only that his handler was tired, that the work was done, and that there would be treats and rest waiting at the end of the night. Sometimes, Sarah thought, it was better to see the world the way Max did. Simple, clear, uncomplicated by the baggage that humans carried with them through every interaction. She loaded him into the vehicle and drove home, the city streets quiet at this hour, the traffic lights cycling through their patterns for an audience of no one. Her apartment was dark when she arrived, exactly as she had left it, with no unwanted visitors waiting inside. She checked anyway, a habit too ingrained to abandon, before finally allowing herself to collapse onto the couch. Max jumped up beside her, curling against her side with a contented sigh. She ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body against hers. The day had brought revelations she had not wanted and decisions she had not sought. It had forced her to confront a past she had tried to leave behind and a family she had convinced herself no longer mattered. But in the end, she had done what she always did. She had faced the problem, assessed the threat, and acted to protect the innocent, even when the innocent were people she had every reason to abandon. Max shifted in his sleep, his paws twitching with dreams of running, chasing, catching. Sarah watched him for a long moment, grateful for his uncomplicated loyalty, his unwavering presence in a life that had become unexpectedly complicated. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more decisions, more of the endless work that constituted justice in a world that rarely offered clean resolutions. But tonight, she would rest. Tonight, she would let the exhaustion claim her, safe in the knowledge that whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The rain began sometime before dawn, a gentle patter against the windows that gradually intensified into a steady downpour. Sarah woke to the sound, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar sensation of having slept on the couch. Max was gone from her side, probably investigating the kitchen in search of breakfast. She sat up slowly, her body protesting the awkward sleeping position, and checked her phone. Several messages waited, a mixture of work updates and personal contacts. One was from Tyler, sent at 3 in the morning, just 2 words. "Thank you," she responded with equal brevity. "You're welcome. Get some sleep." The rain continued throughout the morning, washing away the residue of the heat wave and leaving the city gleaming and refreshed. Sarah took Max for a walk despite the weather, both of them enjoying the cool air and the smell of wet pavement. The dog splashed through puddles with puppyish enthusiasm, momentarily forgetting his dignity as one of the department's most decorated K-9 officers. They returned home to find a message from Captain Rodriguez, confirming that the federal prosecutors wanted a full deposition from her about the events at the warehouse. She scheduled the appointment for the following week, giving herself time to organize her thoughts and process everything that had happened. The next few days passed in a blur of bureaucratic necessities, paperwork, meetings, interviews with attorneys who asked the same questions from different angles, building the case against Meridian Capital brick by careful brick. Sarah answered everything honestly, including the parts that reflected poorly on her brother, because she had learned long ago that truth was the only foundation that did not crumble under pressure. Derek and Vanessa remained in Atlanta, staying in a modest extended-stay hotel while they worked with legal aid attorneys to understand their options. Sarah visited them once, a brief conversation that established boundaries and expectations. She would help them navigate the process. She would not help them escape accountability. Derek accepted these terms without argument, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a humility that seemed almost genuine. Tyler came to see her separately, showing up at her apartment one evening with a pizza and an obvious desire to talk. She let him in, and they sat in her living room while Max investigated the pizza box with professional interest. The boy had changed since the warehouse, some of the fear in his eyes replaced by something more settled, more mature. Trauma did that to people, Sarah knew. It either broke them or made them stronger, and Tyler seemed to be trending toward the latter. He carried himself differently now, with a quiet confidence that had been absent before. "I wanted to thank you properly," Tyler said, setting the pizza box on the coffee table while Max circled hopefully. "Not just the text, face to face. You already did." "No, I mean, Thank you for coming, even though you had every reason not to. Thank you for not giving up on us, when we probably deserved to be given up on." The boy's voice wavered slightly, emotion breaking through the composure he was trying to maintain. "Dad told me about everything, the stuff with your parents, the years of not talking. I didn't know any of it. I thought you were just, I don't know, busy or something." Sarah considered her response carefully, aware that her words might shape how Tyler understood family relationships for years to come. "There's a lot of history between your father and me. Some of it is his fault. Some of it is mine. We both made choices that kept us apart for a long time." She met Tyler's eyes, holding his gaze with the same directness she used in every important conversation. "But history isn't destiny. We can choose to do things differently going forward. Is that what you're doing, choosing differently?" "I'm trying to. It's not easy, and I'm not sure it'll work, but I'm trying." Tyler nodded slowly, processing this. His hand drifted down to scratch Max behind the ears, and the dog accepted the attention with obvious pleasure. There was something natural about the interaction, an ease that suggested Tyler had spent time around animals before, that he understood the unspoken language of touch and gesture that dogs responded to. "I used to want a dog," Tyler said quietly, "when I was younger. But Dad always said we couldn't afford one, that they were too much trouble." He smiled sadly. Turned out the things that were too much trouble were the ones he was creating himself. Sarah recognized the bitterness beneath the words, the disappointment of a child who had watched his parents fail to live up to expectations. It was a feeling she knew intimately, though from a different angle. Derek had been the golden child once, the older brother who could do no wrong, while Sarah had been the afterthought, the girl who was expected to follow quietly in his shadow. The reversal of their positions brought no satisfaction, only a weary recognition of how circumstances could reshape people. "Dogs are worth the trouble," she said finally. "Max is the best partner I've ever had. He doesn't judge, doesn't hold grudges, doesn't complicate things with expectations or agendas. He just is, present, loyal, ready for whatever comes next. He's really smart, isn't he? The way he knew something was wrong before anyone else did. He's the best partner I've ever had. Dogs don't lie, and they don't miss much. If Max doesn't trust someone, there's usually a good reason. Did he trust me?" Sarah thought back to the moment in her apartment when Tyler had stood in the corner while his parents made their demands. Max had focused his attention on Derek and Vanessa, had growled and positioned himself against them. But he had not reacted to Tyler at all. "Yeah," she said, "he did." Tyler smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since this whole mess began. It transformed his face, making him look like the kid he was supposed to be, rather than the scared witness to his parents' mistakes. They finished the pizza together, talking about inconsequential things, school, sports, the peculiarities of living in Atlanta versus Savannah. Normal conversation between relatives who were learning to know each other for the first time. After Tyler left, Sarah sat on her couch with Max beside her, thinking about the strange turns that life could take. A week ago, she had been living her carefully ordered existence, focused on work and routine, deliberately avoiding the complications of family. Now she had a nephew who looked up to her, a brother who was finally facing the consequences of his choices, and a relationship that might, with time and effort, become something other than estrangement. Max rested his head on her lap, his eyes half closed, his breathing slow and regular. She stroked his fur absently, feeling the bond between them like a physical presence. Partners, family, different manifestations of the same fundamental need for connection. The investigation into Meridian Capital expanded over the following weeks, revealing tentacles that stretched across state lines and involved dozens of victims like Derek. Federal prosecutors assembled a RICO case that promised years of legal proceedings and eventually substantial prison sentences for the organization's leadership. Marcus Webb's lawyers proved less effective than he had anticipated. Their motions denied one after another as the evidence mounted. Sarah was called to testify 3 times before various grand juries, recounting the events of that night and the information that had led to the raid. Each time she told the same story, because it was the truth, and the truth did not need embellishment or adjustment. Derek's own legal situation resolved more quickly than expected. His cooperation with investigators, combined with clear evidence of duress, resulted in a plea agreement that included probation and community service, but no jail time. The forged documents were treated as products of coercion rather than fraud, a distinction that saved him from more serious charges. When it was over, when the last form was signed and the last hearing concluded, Derek asked to see Sarah one more time. They met in a coffee shop near the courthouse, neutral territory for a conversation that both of them had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. He looked older than she remembered, the stress of the past months adding years to his face. But there was something different in his eyes, a clarity that had been absent before. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "Not just for the inheritance lie or the break-in. For everything. For all the years I was a terrible brother, for the way I treated you when we were kids, for blaming you for things that weren't your fault." He paused, struggling with words that did not come easily. "I was jealous of you. That's the truth I never wanted to admit. You had your life together, and I didn't, and instead of working on my own problems, I resented you for not having them." Sarah listened without interrupting, giving him the space to say what he needed to say. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I haven't earned that and maybe I never will. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. The whole pattern of my life, the choices I made, the lies I told myself. This whole nightmare with Meridian forced me to look at everything clearly for the first time." Derek's voice cracked slightly. "I almost got my family killed because I was too proud to ask for help honestly. That's going to stay with me forever." When she was certain he had finished, Sarah spoke. "You're right that you haven't earned forgiveness. But forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something that's given." She held his gaze steadily. "I'm not ready to give it yet, but I'm willing to work toward a place where I can. That's going to take time, and it's going to take you proving that this change is real, not just a response to crisis." "I understand." "Good. Then here's what happens next. You rebuild your life, you take care of your family, you prove through actions, not words, that you've actually changed. And maybe eventually we become the kind of family that talks more than once a decade." Sarah allowed a hint of a smile to touch her lips. "Tyler has my number. He's welcome to call whenever he wants. And I'll check in with Vanessa occasionally, make sure you're staying on track." Derek blinked, clearly surprised by the olive branch. "You'd do that. Keep in touch. I'm choosing differently, remember?" They parted with a handshake, awkward and formal, the first physical contact between them in years that was not tinged with anger or confrontation. It was not reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning, and beginnings had value. Sarah walked back to her vehicle, where Max waited with his head out the window, tongue lolling in the warm afternoon air. She opened the door and scratched behind his ears, receiving a wet lick across her palm in return. "Ready to go home, buddy?" Max barked once, his tail wagging furiously. "Home. Yes." That sounded good. The drive across the city was peaceful, traffic light for once. The streets of Atlanta gleaming in the sunshine that had finally returned after days of rain. Sarah rolled down the windows and let the breeze wash over her, feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Not peace, exactly. Something more like equilibrium. A sense that the pieces of her life, scattered by unexpected events, were beginning to settle into a new configuration. At home, she went through the evening routine that had become sacred over years of repetition. Dinner for Max, dinner for herself, a walk through the neighborhood as the sun set, casting long shadows across sidewalks she knew by heart. The evening news, playing softly in the background while she reviewed case files for tomorrow's work. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour, most of its residents either still at work or just beginning to prepare dinner. Sarah walked slowly, letting Max set the pace, watching him investigate the same fire hydrants and tree trunks he had examined 1,000 times before. For dogs, routine was not boring, it was comforting. The familiar scents and landmarks formed a map of their territory, a world they understood and could navigate with confidence. She envied that simplicity sometimes. Her own world had grown so complicated, layers upon layers of responsibility and obligation, that sometimes threatened to crush her under their weight. But moments like this, walking through the golden evening light with Max trotting beside her, reminded her why she had chosen this life. Not for the complexity, but for the moments of clarity that emerged from it. The satisfaction of problems solved, wrongs righted, justice achieved against the odds. An elderly man on his porch waved as they passed, recognizing her from countless previous walks. She waved back, appreciating the small connection, the web of relationships that made a neighborhood feel like home. These were the people she protected, the reason she put on the uniform every day and faced whatever challenges awaited. Not abstract concepts of law and order, but real people living real lives, hoping to do so in peace and safety. Max tugged at the leash, pulling her toward a patch of grass that apparently contained something fascinating. She let him explore, standing patiently while he conducted his investigation with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Dogs lived entirely in the present moment, unburdened by regrets about the past or anxiety about the future. Another quality she envied, another lesson she tried to learn from him without much success. The walk ended as darkness began to gather, the streetlights flickering on one by one along the tree-lined streets. Sarah let them back into the apartment, the familiar space welcoming them with its accumulated comfort. Max headed straight for his water bowl, drinking deeply before settling onto his bed with a contented sigh. She joined him on the floor, sitting cross-legged while reviewing the case files she had brought home. The work never really ended, just shifted from one location to another, one urgency to the next. But she had learned to find peace within the chaos, to create spaces of calm that allowed her to function without burning out. Max curled up on his bed in the corner, watching her with the patient attention he gave to everything. She finished her work, closed her laptop, and joined him on the floor, sitting cross-legged while he rested his head on her knee. "You know what, Max? I think things are going to be okay." The dog's tail thumped against the floor, his eyes bright with unconditional devotion. "Yeah, I think so too." Outside, the city hummed with its endless activity, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to comprehend. Crimes were being committed. Justice was being pursued. Families were falling apart and coming together, fighting and reconciling, making the same mistakes and learning the same lessons that humans had been making and learning since the beginning of time. Sarah Collins was one small part of that vast tapestry, one thread among countless others. But she had made her choices, had faced her challenges, had proven once again that courage and integrity could make a difference in a world that often seemed indifferent to both. And tomorrow, she would do it all again, because that was who she was. That was what she did. That was the life she had chosen, and she would not have it any other way. Max yawned, his eyes drifting closed, his breathing slowing into the rhythm of sleep. Sarah stayed with him for a while longer, drawing comfort from his presence, before finally rising and making her way to her own bed. The night settled over Atlanta, bringing quiet to streets that would roar again with the dawn. And in a small apartment on the third floor of a brick building that had somehow resisted change, a woman and her dog slept peacefully, dreaming of whatever it was that warriors dreamed. Justice, perhaps, or maybe just the simple pleasure of a good day's work, well done. 3 months after the warehouse raid, the last of the Meridian Capital leadership pleaded guilty to federal charges. Sarah watched the proceedings from the gallery, Max's absence beside her, a constant reminder of the parts of her life that did not fit into courtrooms. The sentences were substantial, years in federal prison that would dismantle the organization permanently. The courtroom had been packed for the final sentencing, journalists and law enforcement officials filling every available seat. Marcus Webb stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive lawyers reduced to silent witnesses as the weight of evidence crushed any hope of acquittal. The charges read like a catalogue of predatory practices: racketeering, money laundering, extortion, conspiracy to commit assault, and dozens of lesser offences that individually might have resulted in slaps on the wrist, but collectively painted a portrait of systematic exploitation. The victims had been given the opportunity to speak, and several had taken it. Small business owners who had lost everything, families torn apart by debt and desperation, people whose lives had been upended by an organization that treated human suffering as merely another profit center. Their testimonies had been difficult to hear, raw with emotion and trembling with the effort of facing their tormentors in a public forum. Sarah had not spoken. Her role was that of witness, not victim, and she had no desire to inject personal drama into proceedings that were already emotionally charged. But she had listened to every word, had absorbed the stories of people whose experiences mirrored what might have happened to Derek and his family if she had not intervened. The warehouse raid had prevented one tragedy among many, a single thread pulled from a tapestry of harm that stretched across state lines and touched countless lives. The judge's sentence had been severe, 25 years for Webb, with no possibility of parole for the first 15. His lieutenants received lesser but still substantial terms, ranging from 8 to 20 years, depending on their level of involvement. The organization's assets were forfeit, seized by the government and earmarked for victim restitution. It was not perfect justice, nothing ever was, but it was something. A statement that such behavior would not be tolerated, that there were consequences for treating people as commodities to be exploited and discarded. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked for her comments. She declined, citing the ongoing investigation, and walked away before the cameras could capture more than a glimpse of her face. She had never sought recognition for her work, had always preferred the satisfaction of results to the fleeting validation of public attention. That evening, she received an unexpected call from Tyler. He had been accepted to Georgia State University starting in the fall, planning to study criminal justice. Sarah listened to his excited voice, his plans for the future, his gratitude for everything she had done. "You inspired me," he said. "Watching you that night, the way you took charge, the way you handled everything. I want to help people like that. I want to make a difference." Sarah thought about warning him of the difficulties ahead, the long hours, the emotional toll, the moments when the system failed despite everyone's best efforts. But she looked at Max, dozing on his bed, and remembered why she had chosen this life in the first place. "You'll be good at it," she said instead. "You've got the most important quality already." "What's that?" "Courage. You called me when you were scared, asked for help when your parents wouldn't. That's not easy, and not everyone can do it." She paused. "Hold on to that, Tyler. It'll carry you through a lot." The conversation ended with promises to meet for dinner soon, to celebrate his acceptance, to continue building the relationship they had only recently begun. Sarah set down her phone and looked out the window at the city she had sworn to protect. Max stirred, lifting his head to watch her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand more than any animal should. "What do you think, buddy? Think we made a difference?" The dog's tail thumped against his bed, and Sarah took that as confirmation. They had made a difference. They always did. Not because the world was transformed by their efforts, but because somewhere out there a family was whole that might have been destroyed. A boy was looking forward to a future he might never have had. A cycle of desperation and exploitation had been broken, however temporarily. That was enough. That was always enough. She crossed to Max's bed and knelt beside him, running her hands through his fur while he leaned into her touch. Partners, family, different words for the same truth. "Come on, boy. Let's get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be another long day." Max rose, stretched, and followed her to the bedroom, taking his customary position at the foot of her bed. The apartment settled into nighttime stillness, the city sounds muted by distance and walls, the darkness softened by the glow of streetlights through half-drawn curtains. Sarah Collins closed her eyes and let sleep claim her, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, she would face them the same way she had faced every challenge before, with courage, with determination, with Max by her side. And that, in the end, was all she had ever needed. The final chapter of the Meridian Capital case wrote itself over the following year. Civil lawsuits brought by victims resulted in the seizure and liquidation of the organization's assets, with proceeds distributed to those who had been defrauded. Derek received a modest settlement that helped him and Vanessa start fresh, moving to a small town outside Atlanta, where property was cheap and opportunities, while limited, were honest. Tyler visited Sarah regularly throughout his first year at Georgia State, sharing stories from his classes, seeking advice on navigating a world that was more complex than textbooks could convey. She helped where she could, offering perspectives shaped by years on the streets, cautioning against the idealism that burned so brightly in young officers before reality tempered it into something more durable. Max celebrated his 8th birthday with a party at the K-9 unit facility, attended by officers and dogs who had worked alongside him over the years. He was slowing down slightly, the first hints of age beginning to show in his graying muzzle and the extra moment he needed to rise from lying down. But his instincts remained sharp, his dedication undiminished, his partnership with Sarah as strong as ever. They continued their work together, marking the days with cases and convictions, with moments of danger and hours of routine, with the endless effort that justice required. Sarah never stopped appreciating what they had built together, never took for granted the bond that connected them across the species divide. The cases continued to come, as they always did. Drug busts and missing persons, burglaries and assaults. The endless parade of human misbehavior that kept the police department busy year after year. Sarah and Max handled their share and more, their reputation for effectiveness drawing the most challenging assignments to their desk. She did not mind the workload. It gave her purpose, direction, a reason to get up each morning and face whatever the day might bring. Some cases stayed with her more than others. A kidnapping that resolved successfully, the victim reunited with family after 3 days of frantic searching. A murder investigation that led to the conviction of a man who had terrorized his neighborhood for years. A string of burglaries solved through Max's exceptional tracking abilities. His nose following trails that human investigators would never have discovered. Each success added to their record, building a legacy that would outlast their partnership. But it was the quiet moments that mattered most. The evenings at home, after difficult days, sitting with Max while the weight of what they had witnessed slowly lifted. The early mornings before shift, drinking coffee on the small balcony while the city came to life around them. The wordless understanding that passed between them during operations, the trust that allowed her to send him into danger, knowing he would do exactly what was needed. Max was more than a partner. He was a constant in a life that too often felt chaotic and unpredictable. He was proof that loyalty existed, that dedication could be real and lasting, that the bond between beings could transcend the barriers of language and species. She had learned more about trust from him than from any human she had ever known. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the city slept, they sat together in her apartment, woman and dog, watching the lights twinkle beyond the windows and feeling the satisfaction of lives well lived. The story of the family debt had ended, but their story continued, day by day, case by case, together, always together, until the end. Looking back on everything that had happened, Sarah sometimes marveled at how a single phone call could change the trajectory of a life. Tyler's desperate plea had forced her to confront things she had spent years avoiding, to re-examine relationships she had written off as irredeemable. The experience had not been comfortable. Growth rarely was, but she had emerged from it stronger, more aware of her own capacity for both resentment and forgiveness. Derek and Vanessa were rebuilding, slowly but genuinely. The small town they had chosen offered anonymity and affordable living, a chance to start over without the weight of their Atlanta connections. Derek had found work with a local contractor, honest labor that paid modestly but reliably. It was a far cry from the construction empire he had once dreamed of building, but he seemed content in a way he never had before. Perhaps failure had taught him what success never could. Tyler visited during school breaks, bringing stories of classes and professors and the career he was working toward. He had his aunt's determination, Sarah realized, though he expressed it differently. Where she had always been direct and action-oriented, Tyler was thoughtful and analytical, approaching problems with a methodical patience that would serve him well in law enforcement. She found herself looking forward to his visits, to the conversations that ranged from professional to personal and back again. Because that was what partners did. That was what family meant. That was the truth that no amount of time or distance or hardship could ever change. Sarah Collins understood this in ways that words could not capture, and Max, in his K-9 wisdom, understood it too. They were home. They were together. They were complete. And that was everything.